The gunshot that killed her husband 3 years ago had been the sound of her freedom, though Grace Owens would never say that aloud in polite company. She stood behind the counter of her bakery in Julesburg, Colorado, flour dusting her dark brown hair as she rolled out dough for the day's bread, and tried not to think about how the morning light streaming through the window reminded her of that terrible dawn when they found Malcolm's body in the alley behind the saloon. The sheriff had ruled it an accident, a drunken brawl gone wrong, but Grace knew better. Malcolm Thornton had been a mean drunk with enemies aplenty, and she had been wife number 2 in a marriage that lasted 4 brutal years before a stranger's bullet ended it. Now it was April of 1878, and Grace had built something of her own in this dusty railroad town, where the South Platte River curved through the plains. Her bakery sat on the corner of Main Street, modest but thriving, and she lived in the 3 rooms above it with nothing but her cat and her memories. At 26 years old, she had no intention of ever marrying again. The bruises had faded, but the lessons remained. The bell above her door chimed, and she looked up to see Benjamin Hayes ducking through the doorframe, his hat in his hands. He was a tall man, lean and weathered from years working cattle on the open range, with light brown hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He had been coming to her bakery every morning for the past 6 months, always polite, always buying 2 cinnamon rolls and a loaf of sourdough, and always leaving her with a quiet smile that made something in her chest feel warm and dangerous. "Morning, Miss Grace," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Smells like heaven in here as usual." "Morning, Benjamin," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. She had stopped correcting him about the miss months ago. Everyone in town knew she was a widow, but he insisted on the courtesy, and she found she did not mind. "The cinnamon rolls just came out, still warm." "You spoil me," he said, and there was something in the way he looked at her that made her hands fumble with the paper wrapping. Benjamin Hayes worked for the Hart Ranch about 10 miles outside of town, bringing cattle to market and breaking horses that most men would not dare approach. She had seen him once, standing calm as Sunday morning while a wild mustang bucked and screamed around him, and he had simply waited until the animal tired itself out before approaching with a soft word and a gentle hand. "2 rolls and a loaf?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Please." He counted out the coins carefully, his hands scarred and calloused from rope and leather. "Miss Grace, I was wondering if maybe you might. That is, the church social is this Saturday, and I thought perhaps you might like to go, with me I mean, if you wanted." Grace's breath caught. She had been asked to dances and socials before, but she always declined. The thought of belonging to someone again, of giving up the hard-won independence she had fought for, terrified her more than anything. But Benjamin Hayes was different. In 6 months he had never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything more than a smile and fresh bread. "I don't know," she said slowly. "Benjamin, I appreciate the asking truly, but I am not sure I am ready for that sort of thing." "No pressure," he said quickly, his ears turning slightly red. "Just thought it might be nice to have some company, but I understand if you would rather not." She opened her mouth to decline properly when the bell chimed again, and everything in her body turned to ice. Malcolm Thornton stood in her doorway, alive and grinning, his dark hair slicked back and his expensive suit dusty from travel. He had the same sharp features she remembered, the same cruel twist to his mouth, the same cold eyes that had watched her cry too many times to count. "Hello, wife," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth as whiskey and twice as poisonous. "Did you miss me?" The world tilted. Grace grabbed the counter to steady herself, flour flying everywhere. "You are dead," she whispered. "You died. They found your body. They found a body, Malcolm corrected, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Poor fellow was about my height, drunk out of his mind, made a convenient corpse when I needed to disappear for a while, had some debts to settle, you understand. Easier to be dead than deal with certain gentlemen in Denver who wanted their money back. Benjamin had gone very still beside the counter, his posture changing from relaxed to watchful in an instant. Grace could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a stove. "You need to leave," Grace said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know why you came back, but I have nothing for you. I am a widow. You are supposed to be dead." "But I am not dead, sweetheart," Malcolm said, moving closer, "which means you are still my wife. And I have come to collect what is mine. Pack your things. We are leaving within the hour." "I am not going anywhere with you," Grace said, and she was amazed that her voice did not shake. "Whatever we were, it ended when they put that body in the ground. I have a life here now, a business." "I will not go back." Malcolm's expression darkened. "You do not have a choice, Grace. You are my legal wife, and a wife goes where her husband tells her to go. Now stop making a scene and get your things, or I will drag you out of here by your hair if I have to." She said no. Benjamin's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He had not raised his volume, but there was something final in those 3 words that made Malcolm pause and look at him properly for the first time. "This does not concern you, Cowboy," Malcolm said with a sneer. "This is between me and my wife." "It concerns me when a man threatens a woman in my presence," Benjamin said calmly. He set his package down on the counter and took a single step forward, positioning himself between Grace and Malcolm. "She told you to leave. I suggest you listen." Malcolm laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "What are you, her protector, her lover? Does not matter. She is my wife by law, and I have every right to take her with me. Now move aside before I make you move." Benjamin did not move. He stood there in his work clothes and dusty boots, his hands loose at his sides, and he did not move an inch. "You are going to get yourself hurt, Cowboy," Malcolm warned, his hand moving toward his coat where Grace knew he kept a pistol. She had seen that gun too many times, felt it pressed against her temple when he was in one of his rages. "Benjamin, please," Grace said quickly. "He has a gun. Just let him." "I am not going anywhere," Benjamin said, still watching Malcolm. "And neither are you, Miss Grace. Not if you do not want to go." The moment stretched out like taffy, tension thick enough to choke on. Grace could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then Malcolm moved, his hand darting into his coat, and everything happened at once. Benjamin was faster. His hand shot out and grabbed Malcolm's wrist before the gun cleared the coat, twisting hard. Malcolm yelped and the pistol clattered to the floor. Benjamin kicked it away, and then he did something Grace had only seen him do with spooked horses. He simply held on, his grip firm but not brutal, and waited. "Here is how this is going to work," Benjamin said quietly. "You are going to leave this bakery. You are going to leave Julesburg, and you are never going to bother Miss Grace again. Because if you do, if I hear that you have so much as sent her a letter, I will find you. I am very good at tracking things that do not want to be found." "She is my wife," Malcolm hissed, struggling against Benjamin's grip. "You cannot just—" "She was married to a dead man," Benjamin interrupted. "Legally, I would wager she is a widow now and has been for 3 years. You made yourself dead, Thornton. Stay dead." He released Malcolm's wrist and stepped back, still positioned between him and Grace. Malcolm rubbed his arm, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "This is not over," Malcolm spat. "I know people, lawyers. I can make her life hell. I can take everything she has built here." "Try it," Benjamin said. "See what happens." For a long moment, Malcolm glared at both of them, his jaw working like he was chewing on threats he could not quite voice. Then he bent down, snatched up his gun, and stormed toward the door. "You will regret this, Grace," he said over his shoulder. "Both of you will." The door slammed behind him, the bell chiming cheerfully in contrast to the ugly tension he left behind. Grace stood frozen behind her counter, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. "Are you all right?" Benjamin asked, turning to her with concern written all over his face. "I do not understand," Grace said, her voice coming out thin and high. "He was dead. I saw them bury him." "How is this possible? Men like that have a way of surviving," Benjamin said grimly. "But he is wrong, Miss Grace. You do not have to go with him. We will figure this out." "He said he was my husband. Legally, he might be right. If he was never actually dead, then our marriage never ended." The reality of it crashed over her like a wave. Benjamin, he could take everything. The bakery, my savings, all of it. A woman's property belongs to her husband. The law is clear. "Then we will talk to a lawyer, find out what your rights are." Benjamin hesitated, then added softly, "If you want, I will stand with you through this. You do not have to face him alone." Grace looked at this man who had stepped between her and danger without a moment's hesitation. This cowboy who brought cattle to market and broke wild horses and bought cinnamon rolls every morning just to see her smile. Something in her chest cracked open, painful and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" Benjamin's cheeks colored slightly, but he held her gaze. "I think you know why, Miss Grace. I have been trying to work up the courage to court you proper for months now. I am not about to let some ghost from your past come in and take you away just when I finally managed to ask you to a church social." Despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and the trembling in her hands, Grace felt a smile tug at her lips. "You have terrible timing, Benjamin Hayes." "I have been told that before," he admitted. "But I mean what I said. I will help you through this if you will let me." Before Grace could answer, the door opened again and Sheriff Porter walked in, his badge gleaming on his vest. He was an older man with a gray mustache and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much trouble in his years keeping the peace. "Grace," he said, tipping his hat. Just passed Malcolm Thornton on the street. Nearly did not recognize him, what with him being dead and all. He seemed mighty upset about something. "Want to tell me what is going on?" Grace took a shaky breath and told him everything, from Malcolm's appearance in her bakery to his threats to take her away by force. Sheriff Porter listened with a deepening frown, his hand resting on his gun belt. "This is a complicated situation," the sheriff said when she finished. "If Thornton faked his death, that is fraud at minimum. Might even be insurance fraud if anyone collected on a policy. But he is right about one thing, Grace. If you were legally married and he never actually died, then technically you are still his wife. The law sees it that way anyhow." "That cannot be right," Benjamin said sharply. "She thought she was a widow. She has built a whole life thinking he was dead. He cannot just show up and claim her like a piece of property." "I am not saying it is right, Hayes. I am saying it is the law." The sheriff scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "But there might be angles we can work. If Thornton committed fraud by faking his death, he might not want to push things too far legally. Man like that probably has outstanding warrants or debts. I will do some asking around, send some telegrams, see what I can dig up." "He said he had debts in Denver," Grace offered. "Men he owed money to, that is why he faked his death." "Denver, you say?" The sheriff's eyes gleamed. "Now that is interesting. I know some folks in Denver. Let me see what I can find out. In the meantime, Grace, you stay alert. If Thornton comes around again, you send for me immediately. And Hayes, I appreciate you standing up for her, but do not go looking for trouble. Man like Thornton is likely dangerous." "I am not looking for trouble, Sheriff," Benjamin said quietly. But I will not stand by and watch him hurt her either. Sheriff Porter studied Benjamin for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. I will be in touch, Grace. Try not to worry too much. We will sort this out. After the sheriff left, Grace sagged against the counter, suddenly exhausted. The morning bread still needed finishing, customers would be arriving soon, and her dead husband had just walked back into her life demanding she return to the hell she had escaped. It was too much. Miss Grace, Benjamin said gently, why do not you go upstairs and rest for a bit? I can watch the shop. You have work at the ranch, Grace protested weakly. Frank can manage without me for a day. You just had a shock. Please let me help. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle it herself the way she had handled everything else since Malcolm's supposed death. But the truth was, she was shaking and exhausted and terrified, and the idea of not being alone right now was almost overwhelmingly appealing. All right, she said quietly, just for a little while. She showed Benjamin where everything was, explained the prices and how to wrap the bread, and then she climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment above the shop. Once inside, with the door closed behind her, she finally let herself cry. The tears came hard and bitter, 3 years of freedom dissolving in an instant. She had worked so hard to build something of her own, to become someone other than Malcolm Thornton's wife. And now he was back, threatening to drag her into that darkness again, and she did not know if she had the strength to fight him. But even as she cried, she thought about Benjamin standing between them, unmovable as a mountain. She thought about the way he had asked her to the church social, nervous and hopeful. She thought about 6 months of morning visits and quiet smiles, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like Malcolm. Eventually, the tears stopped. Grace washed her face, changed into a clean dress, and took several deep breaths to steady herself. Then she went back downstairs to find Benjamin selling bread to Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house and making polite conversation about the weather. The rain last week was good for the grass, he was saying as he wrapped her purchase. The cattle are getting fat on all that new growth. You are a natural at this, Grace said, and Benjamin turned with a relieved smile. I was starting to worry I would mess something up, he admitted. Mrs. Henderson was very patient with me. He did just fine, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, winking at Grace. You have got yourself a good one here. Do not let him get away. Grace felt her cheeks heat, but before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson had swept out of the shop with her bread, leaving them alone again. Thank you, Grace said softly, for everything, for standing up to Malcolm, for watching the shop, for caring. Grace, Benjamin said, and it was the first time he had used her name without the miss in front of it. I need you to understand something. What I said before about courting you, I meant it. I have been half in love with you since the first time I walked in here, and you told me my hair looked like I had been wrestling with a tumbleweed. You were not afraid to speak your mind, and you had this light in your eyes that made me want to see it every day for the rest of my life. Grace's breath caught. Benjamin, I am not saying this to pressure you, he continued quickly. I know you have been through hell with Thornton, and I know the timing is terrible, but I want you to know that I am here. Whatever happens with Thornton, whatever we need to do to keep you safe and free, I am here. And when this is all over, if you still want to go to that church social with me, I will be the happiest man in Colorado. Grace felt something unfold in her chest, warm and bright and terrifying. She had spent 3 years building walls around her heart, determined never to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Benjamin Hayes had been quietly dismantling those walls, one cinnamon roll at a time, and now she stood in the rubble wondering if maybe, just maybe, she could be brave enough to try again. I would like that, she said softly. The church social, I mean, once we sort out this mess with Malcolm. Benjamin's smile could have lit up the whole territory. Yeah, yeah, Grace smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in hours. But first we need to figure out how to keep me from being dragged back into that marriage, because Benjamin, I cannot go back to him. I would rather run away and start over somewhere else than go back to being his wife. You are not going to have to run, Benjamin said firmly. And you are not going to have to face him alone. We will figure this out together. The rest of the day passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and tension. Customers came and went, buying their bread and pastries, and Grace tried to focus on the familiar rhythms of her work. Benjamin stayed close, helping where he could and keeping watch for any sign of Malcolm's return. Around mid-afternoon, one of the ranch hands came looking for him, and Grace insisted he go back to work. I will be fine, she said, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. Sheriff Porter is keeping an eye out, and I have a shotgun upstairs if I need it. I do not like leaving you alone, Benjamin said, frowning. I've been alone for 3 years, Benjamin. I can handle one afternoon. She softened her tone. Besides, you will lose your job if you keep skipping work, and I cannot have that on my conscience. Reluctantly, Benjamin agreed to leave, but not before making her promise to lock the doors at closing time and to send for him if Malcolm showed up again. After he left, the bakery felt emptier somehow, and Grace found herself watching the windows nervously, half expecting to see Malcolm's face pressed against the glass. Evening came with no further incidents. Grace closed up the shop, locked all the doors and windows, and retreated upstairs with her shotgun within easy reach. She barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the building settling, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The next morning brought Sheriff Porter to her door with news. Grace let him in before the shop opened, her heart pounding. I sent some telegrams yesterday, the sheriff said, settling his hat on the counter. Got responses this morning. Turns out Malcolm Thornton is a popular fellow. He has got outstanding debts in Denver, Cheyenne, and Santa Fe. There is also a warrant for his arrest in Kansas for fraud. And get this, there was an insurance policy. His brother collected $500 when Malcolm supposedly died. Grace felt a spark of hope. So he committed insurance fraud, among other things. I also got in touch with a lawyer friend of mine in Denver. He says that while technically you are still married, the fact that Thornton faked his death and let you believe you were a widow for 3 years might give grounds for annulment or abandonment. It is not a sure thing, but it is better than nothing. What do I need to do? First, you need to file a petition for annulment. My lawyer friend can help with that, but it will take time. Second, we need to make sure Thornton does not cause trouble while we are working on the legal angle. I have put out word that he is wanted for fraud. If he is smart, he will leave town before I arrest him. And if he is not smart, Sheriff Porter's expression was grim, then we deal with that when it comes. But Grace, I want you to be careful. Man like Thornton backed into a corner might do something desperate. The warning proved prophetic. That evening, just as Grace was closing up the shop, Malcolm appeared again. This time he did not come to the front door. He came around the back, kicking in the weak door that led to her storage room, and he had a rope in his hands. Grace screamed and grabbed for the rolling pin on her counter, but Malcolm was fast, fueled by rage and desperation. He caught her arm and twisted it behind her back, making her cry out in pain. You think you can make a fool of me? He snarled in her ear, his breath hot and sour. You think you can set the law on me, humiliate me in front of that cowboy? You are my wife, Grace, and you are going to learn your place. Grace struggled, but he was stronger, and he had always been stronger. He was forcing the rope around her wrists when the front door exploded inward with a crash. Benjamin stood in the doorway, his face dark with fury, and he was not alone. 3 other men from the Hart Ranch stood with him, all of them armed and looking ready for trouble. "Let her go, Thornton," Benjamin said, his voice deadly calm. "Right now." Malcolm pulled Grace in front of him like a shield, one arm around her throat. "You want her. Come and take her, Cowboy, but I will break her neck before I let you have her." "No, you will not," Benjamin said, and he took a step forward. "Because you are a coward, Thornton. You only hurt women when there is no one around to stop you. But I am here now, and I am not moving. So you have 2 choices. Let her go and walk away, or we do this the hard way." "There are 4 of you," Malcolm said, but his voice wavered. "That is not a fair fight." "You are holding a woman hostage," one of the ranch hands said flatly. "Fair went out the window about 5 minutes ago." Grace felt Malcolm's arm tighten around her throat, cutting off her air. Black spots danced in her vision. Then Benjamin moved fast as a striking snake, and suddenly Malcolm was on the ground and Grace was free, gasping for breath. Benjamin stood over Malcolm, his boot on the other man's chest, and there was something in his eyes that Grace had never seen before. Something cold and dangerous. "Sheriff Porter," Benjamin called without looking away from Malcolm. "You might want to come collect your prisoner." The sheriff appeared in the doorway, apparently having been summoned by one of the ranch hands. He took in the scene with a weary sigh. "Malcolm Thornton, you are under arrest for assault, breaking and entering, and outstanding warrants for fraud," Sheriff Porter said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent, though I do not expect you will take it." As the sheriff hauled Malcolm to his feet, the man shot Grace a look of pure hatred. "This is not over, Grace. I will get out, and when you do, you will leave Colorado and never come back," Benjamin interrupted quietly. "Because if you do not, I will make sure you regret it for whatever is left of your miserable life. Are we clear?" Malcolm did not answer, but the fear in his eyes was answer enough. Sheriff Porter led him away, and suddenly Grace's legs would not hold her anymore. She collapsed onto a chair, shaking all over. Benjamin was at her side in an instant, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "I am all right," Grace managed, though her throat ached where Malcolm had grabbed her. "I am all right." "You are not all right," Benjamin said gently. "But you will be. I promise you, Grace. You will be." The ranch hands left after making sure Grace was safe, tipping their hats respectfully on the way out. Benjamin stayed, helping her clean up the broken door and secure the back entrance as best they could. He sent one of the hands to fetch the carpenter, who promised to fix the door first thing in the morning. "You should not stay here tonight," Benjamin said as they finished boarding up the broken door. "Not with that entrance compromised. Do you have somewhere else you can go, Mrs. Henderson might have a room at the boarding house," Grace said, still feeling shaky. "Or," Benjamin said carefully, "you could stay at the ranch. We have a spare room in the main house. Mrs. Hart, the ranch owner's wife, would be happy to have you. It is just until we get your door fixed and make sure Thornton is really locked up." Grace knew she should probably go to the boarding house. It would be more proper, less likely to start gossip. But she was tired of worrying about what was proper, and the thought of being somewhere safe, somewhere surrounded by people who would protect her, was almost unbearably appealing. "All right," she said. "Just for tonight." Benjamin smiled, relief clear on his face. "I will hitch up the wagon." The Hart Ranch was about 10 miles outside of Julesburg, and the ride there in the gathering dark was oddly peaceful. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and open under a sky full of stars, and Grace felt some of the tension drain out of her shoulders. Benjamin drove with easy competence, the reins loose in his hands, and he kept up a gentle stream of conversation that did not require much response from her. "Mrs. Hart is a good woman," he said. "Came out here with her husband 20 years ago when this was still wild country. She has got a good heart and a sharp tongue, and she does not tolerate nonsense from anyone. You will like her." The ranch house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, with lights glowing warmly in the windows. Benjamin helped Grace down from the wagon and led her inside, where a woman in her 50s was directing the cleanup after supper. She had iron-gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun, and the kind of face that looked like it smiled a lot. "Mrs. Hart," Benjamin said. "This is Grace Owens, from the bakery in town. She has had some trouble, and I was hoping she might stay here tonight." Mrs. Hart took one look at Grace's pale face and the bruise forming on her throat, and her expression hardened. "Of course she can stay." "Benjamin, go help your friends with the horses. Grace, dear, come with me." She led Grace to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor, chattering all the while about nothing in particular, giving Grace time to breathe and settle. She brought warm water for washing, a clean nightgown, and a cup of hot tea that tasted like chamomile and honey. "Now," Mrs. Hart said, settling into a chair by the bed. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to. But Benjamin looked about ready to commit murder when he came tearing in here earlier, asking to borrow the wagon and some of the hands. So I am guessing whatever happened was bad." Grace found herself telling the whole story, from Malcolm's death to his reappearance to the attack in her bakery. Mrs. Hart listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. "That poor excuse for a man," Mrs. Hart said when Grace finished. "Well, you are safe here, dear. My husband keeps this place locked up tight at night, and the hands are all good men. You rest easy tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out the next steps." "Thank you," Grace said, meaning it deeply. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." "You do not need to repay anything. We take care of our own out here, and Benjamin clearly considers you one of ours." Mrs. Hart smiled knowingly. "That boy has been mooning over you for months. I was starting to wonder if he would ever work up the courage to actually court you properly." Grace felt her cheeks heat. "He asked me to the church social before all this happened with Malcolm." "And what did you say?" I said yes, or I meant to say yes. Everything got complicated so fast. "Life has a way of doing that," Mrs. Hart said, standing up. "But complicated or not, that boy is head over heels for you, and unless I miss my guess, you feel something for him too. So once we get this mess with your not-quite ex-husband sorted out, you make sure you give Benjamin a proper answer to that question, you hear?" Grace smiled despite everything. "Yes, madam." After Mrs. Hart left, Grace lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. So much had happened in the past 2 days that she could barely process it all. Malcolm alive, Benjamin's protection, the sheriff's investigation, the attack in her bakery. It was like her whole carefully rebuilt life had been shaken like a snow globe, and she did not know how the pieces would settle. But through it all, one thought kept returning. Benjamin standing between her and Malcolm, immovable as a mountain. Benjamin asking her to the church social with hope in his eyes. Benjamin promising she did not have to face this alone. Maybe, Grace thought as she finally drifted toward sleep, maybe she did not have to be alone anymore. Maybe she could be brave enough to let someone in again. Maybe Benjamin Hayes was worth the risk. The next few days passed in a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. Sheriff Porter charged Malcolm with multiple counts of fraud and assault, and a judge set bail so high that Malcolm could not possibly pay it. Grace filed for annulment with the help of the Denver lawyer, citing abandonment and fraud. Benjamin spent every spare moment he had either with Grace or making sure her bakery was secure, and the other ranch hands took to referring to him as her personal guard dog, which made him flush and mutter denials that fooled no one. Grace found herself falling into an easy rhythm at the ranch. She helped Mrs. Hart with the cooking, which led to her teaching some of the hands how to make proper bread, which led to the ranch house smelling like a bakery every morning, and the hands declaring her an angel sent from heaven. Benjamin watched all of this with barely concealed delight, and Grace caught him smiling at her more than once when he thought she was not looking. 5 days after Malcolm's arrest, Sheriff Porter came to the ranch with news. Grace was in the kitchen rolling out pie dough when he arrived, and Benjamin immediately appeared at her side, as if summoned by instinct. "Got word from Denver," the sheriff said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Hart. "Turns out Malcolm Thornton is wanted for more than just fraud. There is a woman in Denver who filed charges against him for assault 2 years ago, right before he came to Julesburg. And get this, she is claiming they were married, says she has a license and everything." Grace's hand stilled on the rolling pin. "He was married when he married me." "Looks that way. If that is true, then your marriage to him was never legal in the first place. He committed bigamy, which means you were never actually his wife." The relief that flooded through Grace was so intense she had to sit down. "I was never married to him. Not legally, no. The lawyer in Denver is checking on the other woman's claim, but if it holds up, you are free and clear. No annulment needed, because there was no legal marriage to annul." Benjamin let out a whoop of joy and picked Grace up, spinning her around before setting her down quickly and stepping back, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, that is great news, Miss Grace." "It is," Grace agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. "It is the best news I have heard in years." "There is more," Sheriff Porter said, grinning now. "Malcolm is going to be transferred to Denver to face charges there. Between the bigamy, the fraud, the assault charges from both you and the other woman, and the outstanding warrants, he is looking at serious prison time. He will not be bothering you again, Grace. I can promise you that." After the sheriff left, Grace excused herself and went outside, needing air and space to process everything. She walked out to the corral where some of the horses were grazing and leaned against the fence, letting the afternoon sun warm her face. She was free. Truly, completely free. Malcolm had never been her husband, not legally. Which meant the past 4 years of her life had been built on a lie, but it also meant she could close that chapter for good. No annulment needed, no legal battles, no more looking over her shoulder wondering if he would come back. Grace. She turned to find Benjamin approaching cautiously, his hat in his hands. The late afternoon light caught in his hair, turning it golden, and Grace felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "I am all right," she said before he could ask. "More than all right, actually. I am free, Benjamin, really, truly free. I heard." He came to stand beside her at the fence, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "How are you feeling about all of it?" Relieved. "Angry that I wasted 4 years believing I was married to that monster, grateful that it is over." She paused, then added softly, "Grateful for you." Benjamin turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. "Grace, I need you to know something. What I did, standing up to Thornton, protecting you, I did not do that expecting anything in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I care about you. But I do not want you to feel obligated to me. You just found out you are free, and you should take whatever time you need to figure out what you want. If that includes me, then I will be the happiest man alive. But if it does not, I will understand." Grace looked at this good, decent man who had asked for nothing and given everything. She thought about 6 months of morning visits and quiet smiles. She thought about him standing between her and danger without flinching. She thought about how her heart had not felt this light in years. "Benjamin Hayes," she said, "are you trying to take back your invitation to the church social?" His eyes widened. "What? No. I mean, if you still want to go, I do. Grace said. And then, because she was free and brave and tired of being afraid, she reached out and took his hand. I want to go to the church social with you, and I want you to court me properly. And I want to see where this goes because I think it could go somewhere wonderful. Benjamin's face lit up like sunrise over the prairie. Yeah, yeah, Grace squeezed his hand. I have spent 3 years afraid to let anyone close, convinced that all men were like Malcolm. But you are not like him, Benjamin. You are kind and patient and gentle, and you make me feel safe. You make me feel like maybe I could be happy again, and I want to try. If you are willing to be patient with me while I figure out how to do this. I can be patient, Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. I can be so patient, Grace, as long as it takes. And then, standing there in the golden afternoon light with the horses grazing nearby and the prairie wind whispering through the grass, Benjamin Hayes kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and everything a first kiss should be, and Grace felt the last of the walls around her heart finally crumble. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. So, Benjamin said, still holding her hand, the church social is this Saturday. Should I pick you up at the bakery? You should, Grace agreed. And Benjamin, thank you for everything. You do not need to thank me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. He paused, then added with a mischievous grin, though maybe next time we could skip the part where your not quite ex-husband comes back from the dead. That part was a little too exciting. Grace laughed, the sound bright and free, and it occurred to her that she could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. Deal. No more dead husbands showing up, I promise. The church social on Saturday was everything Grace had hoped it would be and more. The whole town turned out for the event, held in the field behind the church with long tables laden with food and a small band playing dancing music. Grace wore her best dress, pale blue with white lace at the collar, and Benjamin showed up at her door in a clean shirt and vest, his hair combed neatly and his eyes shining. You look beautiful, he said when she opened the door, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied, and he offered her his arm with exaggerated gallantry that made her laugh. At the social, they danced and ate and talked with their neighbors, and if people noticed that Benjamin Hayes barely left Grace Owens' side all evening, no one commented. Or rather, everyone commented, but in the approving way of small-town folk who liked seeing good things happen to good people. Mrs. Henderson cornered Grace near the dessert table. I told you not to let him get away, she said with satisfaction. That man is besotted with you, dear. Absolutely besotted. I know, Grace said, watching Benjamin across the field as he talked with some of the other ranch hands. I am pretty besotted with him too. Good. You deserve happiness, Grace. After everything you have been through, you deserve someone who treats you right. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Benjamin led Grace away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the creek that ran behind the church. They sat on a fallen log, listening to the water and the distant sound of music and laughter. I have been thinking, Benjamin said after a moment. About the future, about what I want. And what do you want? Grace asked softly. I want to build something, he said. I have been saving money from my work at the ranch. I have got enough to buy some land, start my own place. Nothing big at first, just a small ranch with enough room for some cattle and horses. Maybe a house with a good kitchen. He glanced at her sideways. Big enough for a bakery if someone wanted to keep making bread. Grace's heart skipped. Are you asking me something, Benjamin Hayes? Not yet, he said quickly. It is too soon, and I know that. But I wanted you to know that when I think about the future, you are in it. You and me building something together. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, that is what I want. Grace took his hand and laced her fingers through his. I want that too. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next month, but someday. I want to build a future with you, Benjamin." They sat there by the creek until the social ended, talking about dreams and plans and all the possibilities that lay ahead. And when Benjamin finally walked Grace home, he kissed her goodnight on her doorstep like a proper gentleman, and Grace went to bed feeling like the luckiest woman in Colorado. The summer passed in a golden haze of courtship and discovery. Benjamin came to the bakery every morning, and some days Grace would close up shop early and ride out to the ranch with him, spending the afternoon helping Mrs. Hart or watching Benjamin work with the horses. He was patient and skilled, gentle with even the wildest mustangs, and Grace found herself falling more in love with him every day. They went on picnics by the river, attended barn dances and church services together, and slowly, Grace learned to trust again. She learned that not every raised voice meant danger, that not every disagreement ended in violence, that a man could be strong without being cruel. Benjamin was teaching her, bit by bit, what real love looked like. In August, news came that Malcolm Thornton had been sentenced to 10 years in prison in Denver for bigamy and fraud. The other woman, whose name was Catherine, sent Grace a letter thanking her for pressing charges and wishing her well. Grace wrote back, and the two women began a tentative correspondence, bonded by their shared experience of surviving Malcolm's cruelty. In September, Benjamin bought the land he had been saving for, a pretty stretch of prairie with a creek running through it and good grass for cattle. He started building a house with help from the other ranch hands, working every spare moment to get it finished before winter. "It is going to have a big kitchen," he told Grace as they stood on the empty land, surveying the stakes that marked out the house's foundation. "With lots of windows for light, and a separate room that could be a bakery if someone wanted, with its own entrance so customers would not have to go through the main house." "Someone would be lucky to have a house like that," Grace said, her heart full. "I am hoping someone will want to share it with me," Benjamin said, "but I am willing to wait until she is ready." In October, almost 6 months after Malcolm's reappearance, Benjamin took Grace on a ride out to his land. The house was nearly finished now, sturdy and well built, with glass windows and a solid roof. He showed her through every room, pointing out features he had included with her in mind. The large pantry for storing flour and sugar, the big oven he had special ordered from Denver, the bedroom upstairs with views of the prairie in every direction. "Benjamin," Grace said as they stood in the empty kitchen, "this house is beautiful." "It is a home," he corrected gently, "or it will be if you say yes." He dropped to one knee right there in the unfinished kitchen, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a tiny diamond, modest but perfect. "Grace Owens," he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. "I have loved you since the first day I walked into your bakery and you told me I looked like I had been in a fight with a tumbleweed. I have loved you through every morning visit, every smile, every moment I have been lucky enough to spend in your presence. I know you have been hurt, and I know you have reasons to be cautious. But I promise you, on everything I hold dear, that I will never hurt you. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never make you afraid. I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you will let me. So I am asking you, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" Grace looked at this good man kneeling on the rough, wood floor of the house he had built with her in mind. She thought about how far she had come from the terrified woman who had believed herself married to a monster. She thought about learning to trust again, learning to hope again, learning to love again. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Benjamin, I will marry you." He stood up so fast, he nearly knocked her over, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "I love you," Grace said, and it was the first time she had said those words to him, the first time she had let herself be that vulnerable. "I love you so much, Benjamin." "I love you too," he said, and kissed her right there in their future kitchen, sealing the promise of forever. They married in November, on a crisp autumn day with golden leaves swirling in the wind. The ceremony was held in the Julesburg church with half the town in attendance. Grace wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Hart had helped her make, and Benjamin wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. Sheriff Porter gave Grace away, since she had no family of her own, and Mrs. Hart cried through the whole ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed Grace like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the congregation erupted in applause. Grace felt joy rise up in her chest so bright and fierce it was almost painful. This was nothing like her first wedding, that grim civil ceremony with Malcolm, where she had been too young and too naive to see the warning signs. This was real and true and chosen freely, and it was perfect. The reception was held at the Hart Ranch, with tables groaning under the weight of food and a band playing lively music for dancing. Grace danced with Benjamin, with Sheriff Porter, with all the ranch hands who had become her friends. She was passed from partner to partner, laughing and breathless, until Benjamin finally reclaimed her for a slow waltz as the evening grew late. "Happy," he murmured in her ear as they swayed together. "So happy I could burst," Grace replied. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for not giving up." "I would have waited forever," Benjamin said simply. "You were worth every second." They left the party around midnight, riding out to their new home in a wagon decorated with ribbons and tin cans that clanked merrily behind them. The house was ready now, furnished with a mixture of new pieces and things Grace had brought from her apartment above the bakery. Benjamin had arranged for her bakery in town to be managed by a woman she trusted, so Grace could keep her business while living at the ranch. The best of both worlds. Benjamin carried her over the threshold of their new home, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the front room. A fire was already burning in the hearth, courtesy of one of the ranch hands who had come ahead to prepare things, and the house was warm and welcoming. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," Benjamin said softly. "Home," Grace repeated, tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, nothing like the rough, painful experiences Grace had endured with Malcolm. Benjamin was patient and careful, making sure she felt safe every step of the way, and Grace discovered that physical love could be a joy instead of an ordeal. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling, and Grace felt more at peace than she had in her entire life. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered. "I thought I was broken, that Malcolm had broken something in me that could never be fixed." "You were never broken," Benjamin said firmly, pulling her closer. "Hurt, yes, wounded, but never broken. You are the strongest person I know, Grace Hayes. You survived hell and came out the other side still able to hope, still able to love. That is not broken. That is extraordinary." Grace turned her face into his shoulder and let herself cry, releasing years of pain and fear and shame. And Benjamin held her through it all, steady as a mountain, until the tears finally stopped and she fell asleep in the safety of his arms. The winter that followed was the happiest of Grace's life. She divided her time between the ranch and her bakery in town, with Benjamin driving her back and forth and often helping with deliveries. The house they had built together felt more like home with each passing day, filled with laughter and warmth, and the easy companionship of two people learning each other's rhythms. In January, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had never wanted children with Malcolm, had been grateful she never conceived during those awful years. But this was different. This was Benjamin's child, conceived in love, and she wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. When she told Benjamin, he went very still for a moment, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Grace confirmed and found herself laughing as he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "Benjamin Hayes, put me down. You will make me dizzy." "I am going to be a father," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Grace, I am going to be a father." "I cannot believe it." "Believe it," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months, there is going to be a tiny person in this house demanding all our attention." Benjamin dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to her stomach, his shoulders shaking. It took Grace a moment to realize he was crying. "Hey," she said softly, running her fingers through his hair. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," he said, his voice muffled. "Everything is so right it scares me. I have got you, and now we are going to have a baby, and I want to be good enough for this, Grace. Good enough for both of you." "You are more than good enough," Grace said firmly, tilting his face up to look at her. "You are going to be an amazing father, Benjamin. Our child is so lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Grace had some rough mornings that kept her away from the bakery more than she liked. Benjamin fussed over her constantly, and Mrs. Hart came over regularly with advice and remedies from her years of ranch living. The whole community seemed excited about the baby, with gifts and offers of help arriving regularly. In August of 1879, Grace went into labor on a sweltering afternoon. Benjamin sent for the doctor and Mrs. Hart, then paced the house like a caged animal while Grace labored upstairs. Mrs. Hart finally told him to go outside before he wore a hole in the floor, and he spent the next several hours sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands, listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom window. Just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry rang out, strong and healthy. Benjamin was up the stairs before Mrs. Hart could come down to tell him, bursting into the bedroom to find Grace exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "It is a boy," she said tiredly. "We have a son, Benjamin." Benjamin approached the bed slowly as if afraid he might break something. Grace shifted the baby so he could see the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. "He is beautiful," Benjamin whispered. "Can I?" "Of course," Grace said, and carefully transferred the baby into his father's arms. Benjamin held his son with the same gentle care he used with newborn foals, his expression full of awe. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. "I am your father. And I promise I am going to do everything I can to be worthy of you." They named him Thomas, after Benjamin's father, with the middle name of Porter after the sheriff who had helped save Grace from Malcolm. Sheriff Porter himself stood as godfather at the christening, looking suspiciously misty-eyed as he held little Thomas and promised to guide him in matters of justice and law. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair, curious about everything and fearless in a way that gave Grace heart attacks regularly. The bakery in town thrived, and Benjamin's ranch grew bit by bit as he added more cattle and horses. They built a separate bakery building on their property, and Grace began selling her goods from there as well, developing a reputation throughout the territory for the best bread and pastries in Colorado. In 1881, Grace gave birth to their daughter, Emma, who arrived in the world screaming her displeasure at everything and never really stopped. She was fierce and opinionated from day one, and Benjamin adored her with a helpless devotion that made Grace smile. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, constantly trying to protect Emma from dangers both real and imagined. In 1883, their second son arrived, named Daniel. He was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and gentle, content to sit and watch the world rather than charge into it head first like Thomas or Emma. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle that got sick and crops that failed. There were moments when money was tight and the future uncertain. But through it all, Grace and Benjamin faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. Malcolm Thornton died in prison in 1885 of pneumonia. Grace felt nothing when she heard the news except a faint sense of relief that he was truly gone this time. She did not tell the children about him. As far as Thomas, Emma, and Daniel knew, Benjamin was their only father and always had been. That was how Grace wanted it. Sheriff Porter retired in 1886 and built a small house on the edge of Benjamin and Grace's property. He claimed it was because the fishing was good in their creek, but Grace suspected he just wanted to be close to his godson and the children he considered honorary grandchildren. He spent his days teaching Thomas to fish, telling Emma wild stories about his years as a lawman, and carving wooden toys for Daniel. Mrs. Hart aged gracefully, still running the Hart Ranch with her husband until they finally passed it on to one of the hands in 1890. She remained close to Grace, the two women having formed a bond like mother and daughter. Grace's children called her Grandma Hart, and she spoiled them shamelessly. In 1892, on their 14th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Grace back to the spot where he had proposed. The house that had been new and empty then was now well lived in and full of life. Their children were older now. Thomas at 13 tall and rangy like his father, Emma at 11 already showing signs of the strong woman she would become, and Daniel at 9 still the quiet heart of the family. "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked as they stood looking at the house they had built together. "Marrying me, taking on this life." Grace looked at him in astonishment. "Regret it? Benjamin Hayes, loving you is the best decision I ever made. You gave me back my life. You gave me a home, a family, a future. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," he said, taking her hand. "You have given me so much, Grace. I want to make sure I have given you enough in return." "You have given me everything," Grace said firmly. "Everything that matters. I love you more today than I did when I married you, and I will love you even more tomorrow. That is enough. You are enough. We are enough." Benjamin pulled her into his arms and kissed her there in the fading light, and it was just as sweet as their first kiss had been all those years ago in the corral at the Hart Ranch. That evening, with their children tucked into bed and the house quiet around them, Grace and Benjamin sat on their porch and watched the stars come out over the prairie. Thomas had Benjamin's love of horses and was already talking about becoming a rancher like his father. Emma wanted to be a lawyer of all things, inspired by stories Sheriff Porter told about courtrooms and justice. Daniel thought he might like to be a teacher because he loved books and learning. "We did all right, did we not?" Benjamin said, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "We did more than all right," Grace replied, leaning into his warmth. "We built something good here, something real and lasting." "I used to wonder what my life would be like," Benjamin said quietly, "before I met you, when I was just another cowboy working for wages. I would look at the sky and wonder if this was all there was. And then I walked into a bakery one morning and met a woman with flour in her hair and fire in her eyes, and everything changed. You changed everything, Grace. We changed everything together," Grace corrected. I was just surviving before I met you, Benjamin, just getting through each day. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope again. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. An owl hooted in the distance. The wind whispered through the grass. Inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Grace made to get up, but the sound settled and she relaxed again. You remember that day Malcolm came back? Benjamin asked suddenly. When I stood between you and him in the bakery. I remember every second of it, Grace said. I remember thinking you were the bravest man I had ever met, and also the most foolish, standing up to an armed man like that. I remember thinking I could not let him take you, Benjamin said. That I would stand there forever if I had to, but I was not going to let him hurt you again. I did not even know if you cared about me then, not really. But it did not matter. I just knew I had to keep you safe. I cared about you, Grace said softly. Even then, I cared. I was just too scared to admit it, too scared to risk hoping again. I am glad you found the courage, Benjamin said. I am glad you said yes. So am I, Grace said. Every single day I am glad. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. Thomas grew into a fine young man and took over more of the ranch work, eventually buying his own land adjacent to his parents' property. Emma shocked everyone by actually going to law school in Denver, one of the first women to do so, and came back to Julesburg to open her own practice. Daniel became a teacher as he had dreamed, running the schoolhouse in town and filling young minds with knowledge and curiosity. Grace and Benjamin grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love remained as strong as ever. They celebrated their 20th anniversary, then their 25th, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren as Thomas married and started his own family. On their 30th anniversary in 1909, Grace and Benjamin stood once again in the spot where he had proposed. Grace was 57 now and Benjamin 59, but to each other they looked exactly as they had on their wedding day. 30 years, Benjamin marveled. Where did the time go? Into building a life, Grace said. Into raising children and running businesses and loving each other. That is where it went. I would not change a single moment, Benjamin said. Well, maybe the moment where Thornton came back. That part I could have done without, Grace laughed. That part led to this, though, to us. If Malcolm had not come back, you might never have told me how you felt. I might never have been brave enough to say yes. You would have said yes eventually, Benjamin said confidently. I would have kept buying cinnamon rolls every morning until you finally agreed to go to a church social with me. You are probably right, Grace admitted. I was already halfway in love with you by the time Malcolm appeared. I was just too stubborn to admit it. I know, Benjamin said with a grin. I could tell by the way you would smile when I walked in, like you were trying not to be happy to see me but could not quite help yourself. Insufferable man, Grace said fondly, swatting his arm. 30 years of marriage and you are still impossibly smug. 30 years of marriage to the most amazing woman in Colorado, Benjamin corrected. I have earned a little smugness. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their steps slower than they used to be, but just as sure. Inside, preparations were underway for the anniversary party their children had insisted on throwing. The house would soon be full of family and friends, celebrating 3 decades of love and partnership. But for now, in this quiet moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy and the baker who had found each other in a dusty Colorado town and built something beautiful together. I love you, Grace said, stopping him before they went inside. In case I have not said it enough over the past 30 years, I love you, Benjamin Hayes. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saved me too, Benjamin said, cupping her face in his weathered hands. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters. He kissed her there on their doorstep, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of history and the promise of however many years they had left. And when they finally went inside to join the celebration, they did so together, as they had done everything for the past 3 decades. The party was joyous and loud, filled with laughter and music, and the kind of chaotic energy that comes from having 3 generations under one roof. Thomas's children ran wild with Sheriff Porter trying and failing to maintain order. Emma argued good-naturedly with her brother about politics, while her husband wisely stayed out of it. Daniel played piano while people danced, his gentle patience making even the most complicated pieces sound effortless. Mrs. Hart, now well into her 80s, presided over everything like a benevolent queen, telling stories about Benjamin and Grace's courtship that made both of them blush. Sheriff Porter, equally aged but still sharp as a tack, added his own commentary about the day Malcolm had been arrested, making it sound much more dramatic than Grace remembered. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Grace found herself standing in the kitchen of her home, watching her family. Benjamin was teaching their oldest grandson how to arm wrestle, letting the boy win with exaggerated groans of defeat. Emma was deep in conversation with a neighbor about some legal matter, her eyes bright with passion for her work. Daniel had one of the younger grandchildren on his lap, reading a story in his calm, soothing voice. Thomas stood with his wife, his arm around her waist, looking content and settled in a way that reminded Grace of Benjamin. This was what she had built. Not just a house or a business, but a family, a legacy, a life full of love and meaning. The scared young woman who had believed herself married to a monster would never have imagined this future was possible. But she had found the courage to hope, to trust, to love again, and it had led her here. Benjamin appeared at her side, sliding an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am," Grace said simply. "How different my life could have been if you had not walked into my bakery that first morning." "I am the lucky one," Benjamin insisted. "You could have said no. You could have turned me away, kept your walls up, stayed closed off. But you took a chance on me." "Best chance I ever took," Grace said, turning to kiss him softly. "Grandma and Grandpa are being mushy again." One of the grandchildren called out, and everyone laughed. "Let them be mushy," Thomas said, grinning at his parents. 30 years of marriage, they have earned the right to be as mushy as they want. The party finally ended near midnight, with everyone heading home or to the spare rooms Benjamin had added to the house over the years to accommodate visiting family. Grace and Benjamin climbed the stairs to their bedroom, tired but happy, and prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of 3 decades. "Thank you," Grace said as they settled under the covers. "For what?" "For standing between me and Malcolm that day. For not moving. For giving me the space to be brave enough to love you. For 30 years of being the best husband I could have ever asked for." "Thank you for saying yes," Benjamin replied. "For trusting me. For building this life with me. For every morning I got to wake up beside you." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Grace's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had come so far from that terrified woman in the bakery. She had survived, she had healed, and she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. Benjamin and Grace lived many more years together, watching their children flourish and their grandchildren grow. They celebrated 40 years of marriage, then 45, each anniversary a testament to the power of love and commitment. When Benjamin finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Grace held his hand and whispered that she would love him forever. that he had been the best thing that ever happened to her, that she would carry him in her heart until they met again. She lived 3 more years after his death, surrounded by family, still sharp and strong despite her age. She spent her final days in the house they had built together, looking out at the prairie they had loved, and when she closed her eyes for the last time, she was smiling. They buried her beside Benjamin on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one they had lived under for so many years. The headstone reads simply, "Grace Hayes, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was brave enough to love again." And on Benjamin's stone beside hers, "Benjamin Hayes, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He stood between her and danger and never moved." Their children and grandchildren gathered around the graves, telling stories about the cowboy and the baker who had found each other in a dusty Colorado town and built a love that lasted a lifetime. They spoke of courage and healing, of standing up for what was right, of the power of choosing hope over fear. Thomas told his grandchildren about how their grandfather had protected their grandmother from a dangerous man, standing firm when others might have backed down. Emma talked about how their grandmother had survived terrible things and still found the strength to build a business and a family. Daniel reminded everyone that love was not just about the big, dramatic moments, but about showing up every day, choosing each other again and again, building something real and lasting. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the family finally left the graves and headed back to the house that Benjamin and Grace had built. It would stay in the family for generations, a reminder of the love story that had started in a bakery in Julesburg and had grown into something extraordinary. Because sometimes, if you are very lucky, you meet someone who stands between you and your demons and refuses to move. Someone who sees you at your most broken and loves you anyway. Someone who gives you the time and space to heal, and then builds a future with you that is so bright it washes away all the darkness that came before. Grace and Benjamin had been that for each other, and their love had echoed through the years, creating ripples that touched everyone around them. Children were raised with their example, learning that real love was patient and kind and brave. Grandchildren grew up hearing stories about courage and second chances. Great-grandchildren would one day walk the land their ancestors had built and know that love, true love, was worth fighting for. The house on the prairie stood strong through decades more, sheltering generations of the Hayes family. The bakery in town remained, eventually run by Emma's daughter who had inherited Grace's talent for baking. The land that Benjamin had bought and built on stayed in the family, worked by Thomas's sons and daughters and their children after them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars came out over the endless prairie sky, people swore they could see 2 figures standing hand in hand on the hill where they were buried, the cowboy and the baker, together still in whatever comes after, their love proving stronger than death itself. Their story became legend in Julesburg, passed down through the years as an example of what real love looked like. It was told to young couples at their weddings, to people facing hard times who needed to remember that healing was possible, to anyone who had ever been hurt and wondered if they could trust again. The answer was always yes. Yes, you can trust again. Yes, you can love again. Yes, you can build something beautiful from the broken pieces of your past. Grace and Benjamin had proven it, and their legacy lived on in every person who chose to be brave enough to hope, brave enough to stand between someone and danger, brave enough to say yes when love came knocking again. And so the story ended, not with tragedy or loss, but with love multiplied across generations, with lives built on the foundation of courage and commitment, with the knowledge that sometimes the best things in life come after the worst, if only you are brave enough to keep your heart open to the possibility. The cowboy stood between her and danger, and he did not move. And because of that, everything changed. Two broken people found each other and became whole. A love story began that would echo through the decades, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe in second chances, in healing, in the transformative power of real, true, lasting love.